Literary Essay, Lesson 10. Today we're going to be talking about how we are going to structure our conclusion paragraphs. So our learning target is I can draft a conclusion that restates my claim and connects the theme to my own life. So we are going to be looking at some example conclusions from our mentor texts. We're going to talk about what you notice about the structure and the elements of each conclusion. We're then going to talk about how the author connects the theme to their own life. And then lastly, you're going to use what you've learned to write your own conclusion for your paper. Our new vocabulary term for today's lesson is conclusion. And a conclusion is the last part of something, its end or result. In writing, you sum up the text in your conclusion. So now we're going to look at some example conclusions from some of our mentor texts of different literary essays. So this first example comes from a literary essay on the short story 11. Literature can help you understand things better. For example, I have come through Rachel's thoughts and experiences to a conclusion that growing up is not all birthday parties and blowing out candles, and I have learned that I should appreciate being young while I am. Alright, so let's talk about this for a minute. So she does a good job of summing up her paper. First of all, the first sentence, literature can help you understand things better, is very vague. Like, what is it helping us to understand? Plus, her thesis, which came from her introduction, said, in the story 11 by Sandra Cisneros, Rachel comes to an understanding of what being 11 really feels like. Okay, so that was your thesis. That's what you were trying to prove to us throughout this paper. But yet, this first sentence in your conclusion, literature can help you understand things better, really has nothing to do with what you told us your paper was going to be about. So your first sentence when you're writing your conclusion needs to tie back to your thesis or restate your thesis because you're trying to sum up your entire paper. So the first sentence, you're going to refer back to your thesis or you're just going to restate your thesis. Do not just copy and paste your thesis. You're going to rewrite it in different words. She does do a good job at comparing the story and her theme or what she was writing about in her paper to her own life because she says, I have come through Rachel's thoughts and experiences to the conclusion that growing up is not all birthday parties and blowing out candles, and I have learned that I should appreciate being young while I am. And she's connecting it to her own life by explaining what she learned from the story, and that's perfectly fine. So after you have restated your thesis, you're going to connect the story and the theme to your own life. So this is where you can make it personal. In your introduction and your body paragraphs, it's not personal. You're not using I or me, but in your conclusion, I want you to. So this is where you can use I and me, and you can refer to yourself and you can make it personal. However, I don't see a concluding sentence here because, and I have learned that I should appreciate being young while I am. Okay, great. That it goes back to you tying the story to your own life. So remember to have a concluding sentence. And your concluding sentence is just going to kind of tie up your entire paper. So you can refer back to your theme, you can refer back to your thesis, you can refer back to an example. It doesn't matter. You could ask a question. It doesn't matter, but you want to sum up your paper. So you need that conclusion sentence so that the author knows that you are finished and that the author isn't wanting more. Okay, our second example comes from a literary essay on The Marble Champ. I enjoy underdog stories because they make me have a feeling of strange success inside. I have experienced being an underdog in soccer, but in the end, like Lupe, my soccer team succeeded. The hidden lessons I learned from the story taught me that even if you don't think about it, there's a part inside of you that says your parents are there. Just remember who held you when you learned how to swim. Now let's discuss the good and the bad from this example. So her first sentence, I enjoy underdog stories because they make me have a feeling of strange success inside. In her introduction paragraph and her essay, she did talk about how the Marvel champ is an underdog story. Her thesis was it tells not only about Lupe winning the Marvel Championship, it also tells that she overcomes her athletic difficulties through hard work and family support. So I would say she did a good job about tying this back to her theme and her thesis. She didn't just copy and paste her thesis, she kind of just summed up what her thesis was. So I think that works. Perfect. She then goes into connecting it to her own life by saying, I have experienced being an underdog in soccer. And then she tells a little bit about that. So good job. And then at the end, she says, just remember who held you when you learned how to swim. I think that is a good concluding sentence because it goes back to the moral of the story. She talks about how her parents are there for her and how parents are always there for your children, according to the story. So I think that really works. So this one does a decent job at restating the thesis, connecting it to your own life, and then having that concluding sentence. Like, based on this paragraph, I know the paper's over and I'm not expecting to read anymore, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on something. And our last example comes from a literary essay on the Hunger Games. So it says, I believe it is important to sacrifice for family. Although no one in my family faced death to sacrifice for our family, they sacrifice in smaller ways every day. When I was small, my mother stayed home with us kids instead of working. With only one income, we were very poor. I remember the hushed whispers between my parents that always meant they were discussing money. My mom sacrificed money for time with us. In order to make ends meet, my dad sacrificed his time to do extra jobs whenever he could. In addition to his full-time job, he worked at a grocery store for extra money. When we were a little bigger, my mom went to work. Even with two incomes, he sacrificed his time for a second job. He used some of the money to give us opportunities that he never had. He paid for piano lessons and road trips to visit family in Texas. Because of this sacrifice, we got to learn about music and see the world a little. I am thankful for this sacrifice. Someday I hope I will be able to help my family in the way that they have helped me. I hope I never have to risk my life like Katniss did for her family in the Hunger Games. So now let's talk about this example. So her first sentence, I believe it is important to sacrifice for her family. Her thesis was, the Hunger Games supports my belief that it is important to sacrifice for your loved ones. Her first sentence says, I believe it is important to sacrifice for family. So that exactly sums up her thesis. It's restated. It's not the same words. It has the same format, but it ties back to her thesis statement, her claim. And then she goes in to talk about how it connects to her own life. She says, no one sacrificed death for their family, but then she talks about sacrifices that her parents did make. So she did a really good job at tying the story and her theme into her own life. And then at the end, she talks about how she is thankful for this sacrifice and she hopes that one day she can help family the way they helped her. And then, I hope never have to risk my life like Katniss did for her family in the Hunger Games. So her conclusion sentence sums up what she said in her conclusion, but then it also sums up the point of the book and her paper. So she did a really good job. So out of the 3 examples that I showed you, I would say that this one is the best example. Your conclusion does not have to be this long. Remember, paragraphs are 4 to 6 sentences. That is great. 4 to 6 sentences. So it doesn't need to be this long, but make sure that you have your restated thesis, it connects to your life, and then you have your conclusion sentence. And again, structure for a conclusion. When I am reading your paper, these are things I want to see in your conclusion. The first sentence needs to restate your thesis. You're not copying your thesis, you're restating your thesis in different words. What was the point of this paper? Then you're going to connect the theme to your life. So how does this theme connect to your life? If you don't have a connection, like maybe you were never on a sports team, so you don't know what it's like to be an underdog, maybe your family never had to sacrifice anything, that's fine. Just talk about the theme and the lesson you learned from the story. So a connection doesn't have to be personal, it could also be something that you learned. And then your conclusion sentence, you're just going to tie it back to your thesis, you're going to tie it back to your theme or how the story connects to your life, but you need to make sure that your paper feels finished and like I'm not trying to flip the page to see if there's more. So restate your thesis, connect the theme to your life, and then your conclusion sentence. So now that we've gone over how to structure a conclusion paragraph for your literary essay, you're going to take some time to write your conclusion for your literary essay. But before you do that, you do have some exit ticket questions. So question 1, what is a conclusion? Question 2, how is the conclusion of a literary essay structured? And then write your favorite sentence from your literary essay conclusion.